Hello, everyone. Yeah, over the past few years, I've been keeping an eye on SIP technology, and I've been wondering why it didn't progress. And quite frankly, I've been looking at it initially from a security angle because I wanted to have encryption, and nothing really worked until ZRTP came along, which made me really happy, made me dive into SIP again, and I immediately bounced into the big problem of SIP, and that's NAT. And the solution, of course, is trivial. It's running it over IPv6 and being harsh about it. Now, SIP can be really tremendously powerful and beautiful. This is a picture of a friend of mine, Brechtje Lulofs. She's an artist, and she draws these beautiful, stylish, nostalgic pictures. She's a really good illustrator, I think. And yesterday, when I was preparing for this talk and making my slides, my phone told me I had an incoming phone call from my front door, which, of course, is a SIP phone. And she was slightly confused. This was not the pattern she had expected. But this is a sort of fun thing you can do with SIP, right? I was away for a few days when my Raspberry Pi was... I got an email that my Raspberry Pi would be delivered out next day, and I wouldn't be there. Now, that's a disaster. So what you do, you log onto your phone, you reroute it to a few neighbors who call over SIP, and they pick up your front door, walk outside, meet the package delivery guy, pick up the package, and walk away again. This is the sort of fun that SIP is meant for. It's very useful. Now, you could say, why talk about SIP at all? It's all been designed. There's lots of extensions, beautiful, and it's just about communicating, hey, I'm going to send some media, you pick it up. It's trivial. Unfortunately, it's not. SIP is very much hampered by NAT issues, and even more than FTP, where at least one side is a server. So you can say, I'll go passive, and I'll just do it the other way around, and then I will pierce through my own NAT. With SIP, you have peer-to-peer communication. You will preferably send your media stream peer-to-peer, and that's not working. Other things are also complicating, like there's, at least in the Netherlands, but I believe in many other countries as well, the party acting as your ISP doubles as a telco, and that doesn't make them really open to providing SIP as open as we all want it to be, and hopefully someday my parents can use, for example. Users don't understand how to free themselves. You can explain that they could call for free, but they'll grasp the free beer aspect, not the free speech aspect. And that, I think, is something, well, you have to show, and you have to show that you're available for telephony at your email address, and they'll understand it. Now, just very quickly, what's the problem with NAT? You have two phones talking to some sort of a PBX. Sorry about the crummy graphics, by the way. I had a font meltdown, and I had to use this crummy OpenOffice that, well, I don't like it. LaTeX is much nicer, but this will have to do. One phone connects to the PBX. It says, I've got an invitation for you. Yeah, I'll pick it up. By then, they've exchanged a media stream, and they will directly exchange this traffic. Except in practice, because in practice there's this firewall and NAT in between that makes it necessary to go through a central node in general. I'll get to the details later. Now, the firewall aspect isn't a problem at all. I mean, getting through firewalls is just a lot of fun, right? That's not a big problem. But NAT is really nasty because you send out, this is my address, it's rewritten. Or it's not rewritten. You have to figure out how you look on the outside, and it might vary. Briefly said, one party, blue, wants to call purple, and blue says, okay, I'm going to use something like Aston to figure out how I look on the outside. What's my IP? What's my port? I'm going to ignore the IP for now. What's the port? It gets a response saying, you look to me like you're active on port A. So then it sends, a SIP invite, including a session description saying, please send media to port A. I've got a port reserved for that through Aston. The other party does the same. The purple party says, oh, I'm on port B apparently, so you can send media to port B. And then the parties start sending media to each other from A to B and from B to A. That's symmetric RTP. That's the only way to keep NAT and firewalls open, because if traffic travels in one direction only, you are not going to keep it open. Average firewall will close then. Now the problem is, as soon as you start doing that, you're using a different connection than the one you used to contact the Aston server. ICE is a bit of a solution for that. It says, well, I'm going to use the actual target port for Aston, but it still doesn't completely solve it in all cases. So you end up with another port, and over here some nasty thing happens, like a firewall saying I'm being attacked, or at least the media doesn't arrive. So you end up with, we've probably all experienced it, one-sided phone calls. I can hear you, you can't hear me. And this is very confusing to users, to us as well, actually, I think. You've got three parties, and everyone can talk to the top party. So he says, hey, my connection is working. He says, my connection is working. When I call you, it's going wrong. And that's because of the type of NAT that can happen. And this part, I should have changed this text, I'm sorry. This party says, you're to blame because I can normally call, and this party says, you're to blame because I can normally call. Now this is really constructive, but this is too confusing. You can't explain this. You can explain you are wrong. You can't explain you are wrong in the case you're talking to somebody else who's also wrong. Now there are varieties of NAT, and most of you have heard the terms full cone, restricted cone, port restricted, and so on. And symmetric, well, symmetric is the devious one, of course. And S-turn measures what type you have. You try it on a few addresses and a few ports, and it comes back with different or the same results, and then you conclude in what category you fall. That have to be the Russians invading. No time for that now, I've got an hour only. The classification turns out not to be refined enough, and to give you an idea, without bashing anything, Teredo failed on this specific aspect. It assumed that the classification of S-turn worked. Based on that, it says, I can indeed give you an IP address. It started communicating and things go awry because the classification wasn't subtle enough, meaning that 1 out of 3 packets doesn't arrive at the destination. 1 out of 3 destinations can't be reached, is what I should say. So, symmetric NAT really is beyond help, but we have to assume it's out there. Some people have it. And we all know how easy it is to replace Soho routers. It's an expense for the people rolling them out. So, in general, to be certain that you can talk to anyone, you will always have to rely on at least a fallback of a remote party that serves as a media proxy. Now, that's not a problem per se. I mean, we're talking about kilobits, right? It's not very interesting. If you take codec 2, you talk about 1400 bits a second as an audio rate. More about that later. But these people will, the people rolling out this sort of stuff, offering this sort of facility in a shrink-wrap package, usually want to charge for a service and not for bandwidth. And that somehow feels unfair when you've got the mindset of SIP and telephony should be free and open on the internet. So, like we have a telco here in the Netherlands who takes a totally different approach. They're a mobile telco. 2/3 of them are sitting here, actually. They're a mobile telco who says, we are just going to be the tap from the internet to your mobile phone, and we're going to charge you for traffic, and we don't care what you do over it. We're going to help you do it with SIP, and we're going to help you do it openly, and all those things. That model isn't really commonplace. They're really pioneers in that sense. They're brave. So charging for service instead of bandwidth is one of the free beer aspects that is really missing. SIP over IP4 really, to me, means a lock-in danger. I'm not saying everybody's evil. I'm saying it happens and people are captured in such situations. Now, why wouldn't we run SIP over IP6 then? I mean, it solves all our problems. We only have firewalls left, and hey, that's fun to travel through. You just start sending UDP, and the other side does it too, and you've both opened the port, it's symmetric, and you'll get in. There's no address rewriting, so you know what the remote port is. You know what the remote address is. It's not going to change. You don't need S-turn. Now, one reason to not run SIP over IP6 could be, I don't have IP6 yet. That's a bit nostalgic, if I'm maybe honest, and you should probably change your provider because they should be ashamed of themselves. We actually have parties rolling out the future internet, and they forget about DNSSEC and about IP6, and yeah, it's over fiber with the same speed as ADSL. My remote party doesn't have IP6 yet. That's a bigger problem. You want to talk to someone, you've done your homework, you're running IP6, but you can't rely that everybody else has. I mean, we all love those models, right? If the entire world would change, it would be a happier place. Yeah, I love them, but it's not going to happen. But should we wait for that? I don't think so. I think we should opt for doing SIP over IP6 right now. And with that rather stubborn approach. I've been working for the past few years to define transition tools, to create them also, so that at least we can have IP6 going and a fallback to IPv4 for the people who are still mucking around with that old crummy business. Oh, I shouldn't. I think the guidelines say I shouldn't bash on anything, so it's not an IP4. So forcefully running something over IP6 is a bit of a wet dream. So I needed to make those transitional tools. Now there are tunnels to make this happen, right? And we'll just pick the most suitable one. Unfortunately, none is. I'll show you in a minute why. But that's basically the approach. Now, the scenario that comes up here immediately is, I'm talking IP6, the remote party is talking IP4, I need to transit. Now, what can you do? You could just pick up the SIP and RTP traffic, translate it, and do it bidirectionally. That's not a big problem in itself. Of course, you are suffering not, so you want to do it at a public IP, like in a router, for example. And there is technology to do this. SARE, OpenShips, Camilio, it's all alter egos of the same product. And probably I'm insulting people who are very clear about licenses at this point, but they're basically the same and they keep up with each other, so you've got a choice which of the same product you run. Green, 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 or green is your choice of colors. These products are reliable, they're efficient, they're well tested. If you use a SIP provider, chances are they run one of these products. They are very generic, meaning they're pretty hardcore to configure, so it's not everybody's cup of tea. And you'll be using the RTP proxy. When I mentioned to one of the mobile guys over there that it's so well documented, he immediately bursted out into coughing, and he didn't quite agree. And it's indeed very poorly documented. It's actually so poorly documented that I said it's easy to make a new daemon myself and do the translation for myself. And that led to SIP proxy 6.4. And what that does is just what it says. It's a proxy you send on the IP6 side, you send something that comes out as IP4 and the other way. SIP as well as RTP. So you can be on IP4, the remote can be on IP6, the reverse is possible. It covers all current SIP RFCs because the header formats have a limited number of syntaxes, so it's also very easy to add on to that, to implement new headers as they are added. And it's virtually stateless. I mean, you've got a session going on, so you need to continue doing RTP, but that makes it operationally very easy to, you just kill the daemon, you start it again. It's UDP, the client will wait, or resend. And it's also, every individual packet is treated as one, so it's very hard to make bugs that manifest themselves all over the place. Very important, the size is less than 50 kilobytes. Meaning, at the precise point where you have a public IP4 address, namely your router, you can embed it. Well, that I think is quite a useful property. Well, there's a tool, and it works. Well, I made a new version, I have to test it more thoroughly, but yeah, it works. Now, something I learned while doing this, and that's just a sidetrack a bit. I originally, the first version of this thing, I used a freely available SIP parser, the same one, by the way, that Siemens uses in their phones, and that have forced them to free up their code, which in itself is good. But it has very incomplete documentation, like it's very unclear who creates what and who should clean up what memory. So either you've got memory leaks or you've got crashes. And that, again, I prefer to use my own parser instead, and that's a bit of a nuisance. I want to emphasize to all of you guys, do code, but also do document. It's at least as important to do that well, because it's so much effort to figure out what the programmer had in mind. So end of sidetrack. The same goes for RTP proxy that I mentioned. It's also a problem because it is not documented. You just have examples and have to, I mean, we're not Microsoft, right? That's what Microsoft does. And it's proving to make the platform unstable. Now, another reason not to run IP6 for SIP could be you have a piece of hardware and it's not running. It's not running an IP4 stack, IP6 stack. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, we've seen Jeroen's talk yesterday. Jeroen, he's over there. Hardware is just basically firmware in a jacket, and you should just open the jacket and play around with it. I'll give a few demos later. A few examples. And wouldn't it be nice to have a complete zip firmware set dedicatedly written to be small, to run on hardware, and to have a very small layer of hardware drivers, which are just about the same anyway, and rather than piling up the incredibly large Linux and getting quite a bit extra overhead from that. And of course have all sorts of dedicated functions on top, not just phones, but also alarm clocks. The front door bell, of course, it's still not running my own code. That's because the Linksys Spy uses a VCD processor that somehow got sidetracked into a phone and is totally not documented and probably programmed in Pascal or something. So that should be another device soon. A meeting phone, of course, stereo, all that, broadband, why not? And of course it could function as a radio. You've got a device with a speaker on your desktop. I also know an application of a device with a microphone on your desktop. I'm not going to say that aloud because you will fry me. But the government should probably sponsor this. Okay, crazy. I created, am still creating, at least in the concrete demo I'm working on, 0 CPM firmware. I call it firmware because it's a bit firmer than the original firmware. And it indeed is a bottom layer with GPL v3, so yeah, you can port, but you'll have to keep it free, and that's tied to the top layer, which therefore is also GPL, and that runs the zip applications. And basically this says, guys, pick it up, use it, replicate it, improve upon it, but then donate back if you start selling it. And that I think is important. Runs the best codecs. Codec 2 is a project by David Rowe, who tries to run a telco on Wi-Fi, sort of reinventing DECT over Wi-Fi because it's free of licenses. He wants to use this in poor countries where a lack of food is being replaced by a lack of telephone capacity or money to purchase cell phone capacity. Where they used to be ripped off by all sorts of effects in the past, they're now being ripped off by cell phone companies, and he wants to free them from that. And to that end, he's created a codec. He's like an audio engineer. He's created a codec which sends 20 times per second. He sends 5 bytes. And that's not audio data, but he describes the form of the throat, whether or not something is voiced, that sort of difference, and roughly what the frequency spectrum is of your vowels, your mouth, your nose, all that. And he uses that to reproduce how your voice sounds. It's amazing work. Go and look it up. I mean, you can hear computers in between. It's not the same voice that you know, but it's recognizable. You can understand what's being said, so it's good enough. Radio codecs L16. Why not use it as a sound card next to your PC? Why have a separate speaker set for that? Vorbis, yeah, sure, why not? We won't have radio, right? A few less likely things, I also implemented real-time text, which is like, as soon as you type a keystroke, it's sent to the other side, and that's specifically interesting to people who are deaf or hard of hearing, because they can sort of interact. They can, halfway you're typing, they can inject something, like you would when I say something wrong. Oh, wait, but what you're going to do now is wrong. They can do that. Probably want to do something like a fax relay. And, of course, most important, IPv6 anywhere. And I'm getting to that when I get to tunnels. I'm currently doing that with a ground stream BT200. This is how it looks. Well, not on the brochures, but there's this beautiful 12-pin connector and a 6-pin connector. I've forgotten which is which, but there's JTAG there. There's not a serial port, I believe. And there is there's something to bootstrap from, to bootstrap over I2C. When you set one bit to 1 and the other to 0, then it will download programs from I2C. So they needed to make a boot floppy. Well, the Linux kernel holds documentation on how you create a I2C connector for your RS-232, sorry, parallel port. And as you can see, it's been made just that when you fold apart the pins of the one chip that's in it, you can put on the resistors, you can close the package, and it almost looks like you've delivered neat work. I2C EEPROMs usually aren't very big, and I wanted to make a lot of software, of course, because I'm impressive and all that, self-absorbed, whoever. So I just stacked 8 of them together, because there's 3 pins that can be set to ones and zeros to select in what page it falls. So you can stack 8 of those. Of course, all the connections on one side are the same, just like the ground over here. The 5-volt goes here, 3-volt, I'm sorry, goes back here. And then the pattern in which this is laid out is not your average binary code, where you would have lots of bridges and all that. I used a gray code, and that means that all the connections look a bit like this, but they never cross. So I managed to do this without adding any extra pins. I could reuse the pins that I had cut off. Totally useless, but, well, fun. Now, of course, you need a digital scope for this stuff. I was very happy with that excuse to be able to buy one, by the way. And LCD is a big problem. LCDs come well, the chip is either it's part of the glass on which the LCD rests, or it's on a printed circuit board, but then it's not like a proper chip with a number on top. It's actually a sort of rubbery ball, and you can't really scratch it off because the real chip is on there and you'll damage it. So that's and it doesn't have a number. So that's very, very useless. By the way, the reason I started with this particular device is that the chips on it were covered, the big chips were covered in paint, which tells me it's a common off-the-shelf component that we're trying to conceal. So what you do, you get a class scraper, and a very big one with a handle is useful. And just like snow shove, you just push off, because the chips are so beautifully flat, you just push off the paint. You see it going off, and you can read the stuff, and you can download thousands of pages of documentation, which is rather helpful if, well, I'm a bit of an academic, I suppose. I usually work from documentation. Now, these are signals observed from the LCD interface. And if I look at this looks like a clock signal that is temporarily interrupted. Oh, and at that time that one's high, so this is probably an LCD, an enable signal for the communication. Then these are bits that are clocked in. They're 2, 4, 6, 12. That's interesting. And that looks like sometimes a 1, sometimes 0. That's probably data. So what I did then, because I didn't have a chip number, but you can look for words like LCD driver, and the 12-bit pattern was a bit special, so I looked for 10-bit, 11-bit, 12-bit. And this data, of course, occurs in the datasheet. All the data you find, you can look up on the internet, and Google will very gladly assist you in finding the right datasheet. So I found a series out of which I could then isolate the precise one that I had. At least it's functioning equivalently, so don't care. And then you can start programming it. Something else I saw, which was really confusing, were these lines. It doesn't look really digital, right? As it turns out, this is a serial bus on which multiple parties can send in lockstep. So one sends, the other sends, yet another sends. And to make that possible, every device, when it's not sending, goes to high impedance state. And what you see here is an exponential drop that you generally have when a capacitor is discharging, which is what you get when something's floating or high impedance. And then I zoomed in on that, and I got something like this, and I was back home again. I understood that it was just a quicker burst than I thought it would be. Now, this is what I'm particularly proud of. I finally got the right data sent over this crummy serial connection to the... It's a very nasty, awkward thing, but at least I have documentation, but even then it was hard. But here this is the first time I'm sending the right pattern, A5F0 or something. Now, these are digital, right? I mean, they take some time together, but they're digital. This is again a bit special, but this is actually an interesting debugging trick or measuring trick. What happens here is, this is a short circuit between two pins. All the time I've been poking, I want to know where this is, and then using a multimeter to go by the pins of the DSP. And at some point it says beep, and you know that you have to figure out which one it is exactly, start counting, and figure out which it is, of course. Now, this is a bit special. My measuring pin was in between two pins. One is the frame sync pin, and the other is the data in pin. And apparently the data in here is sending signals, and over here it's in high impedance, which is why the short circuit doesn't care. But here the fs goes to 0, and the data goes to 1, to 0, to 1, to 0. So that's actually a neat trick to measure if something is high impedance. Yeah, it's nasty, I know. And don't try this at home, of course. Always do this with your employees' gadgets, never your own. It broke. Okay, this is about cracking hardware, and I'm working hard to make it possible to put your own firmware on there. And the reason I want to do this is not so much, of course, to cater you guys, but it's very much so that I can deliver a SIP stack to all the Chinese manufacturers that want to grow hardware and that are a bit iffy when it comes to software. I'd rather have them run this, and where we can maintain it, expand it with new features, new RFCs and so on, so that we can move SIP forward, because it's always having the trouble. I can do it, but the telco should play along and the other party should play along. And with something like this, you can hopefully break through that. Now, other scenario, you don't have IPv6. Now, this is a bit of a problem, but it does happen. And there are still networks where you can't log in as root, although it takes a bit of exercise sometimes. But don't know why, by the way, why they don't let you in. But that basically means you need a tunnel. Now, all you need to do SIP well is it should work behind any NAT problem. But you can have a tunnel server to help you in cases you need it. A tunnel server being something generic run by another party than your telco. That's an important distinction with the media proxy. It should be open, it should be simple, preferably. I started off with something simple, ended up with something complex, but whatever. It should have the ability to track abusers. I'm sorry, you shouldn't just grab an address and spam people like hell. No configuration, because I want my parents to plug in a phone and be able to use it without configuring IP6. That might be a wee bit too much for them. Well, they're running IP6, of course, and DNSSEC and all that. And preferably, the tunnel server I mentioned should be stateless, because that's easier, that's more reliable, and it should be scalable. And that's a challenge, of course, but, well, there are solutions. Now, I looked at a number of tunnels. Please ignore the last column. I reused a diagram that says, see, I'm perfect. My tunnel does everything it needs to do. But all the tunnels have something in disfavor of them, something that is not working well for the particular. Actually, nobody, as far as I know, actually tried to do real-time peer-to-peer communication wherever it's possible. 6844 is missing here. It could be added, but 6844 relies on your ISP to cooperate. And it also takes configuration, I think. So, it was time for yet another tunnel. Pretty hard to get established, of course, because everybody says, another one, we already have so many. But what it does is quite predictably, it runs IP6, wrapped into UDP and IP4. What else? That works. That's shown to work in several other protocols. It contacts a 6-bit-4 server, which is like the tunnel server. It gets back its IP6 address, which contains its IP4 address, making it trackable without user registration or need of accounts. And from the beginning, it's actually been rock solid, bugs aside, of course, but it's been a rock solid protocol as long as UDP works. And of course, I'm thinking about the TCP fallback, and even on port 443 if you want to be really, but that's like a software choice. It shouldn't be a standard choice, I think. And I mentioned Teredo before. Teredo is based on induction, right? The assumption of Aston, well, you behave like this, and probably you've got this category. Turns out that not all swans are white, there are black swans as well. And that's why Teredo fails in so many cases. So what I've done is just being deductive reasoning from facts. What can I assume about UDP? And what can I certain be about? And that's why it's so very, very stable. Michiel is running it everywhere. I'm very proud of that. Wherever he opens his laptop, he's got IP6. He's using a Linux tunnel client that I wrote. There's a Java implementation, which is a subclass of the datagram socket. And if you can give me a Java written TCP stack, it could also do TCP, but for now it's UDP only. And there's an Android VPN service paid for by SurfNet in part. So you can actually run it on your Android as well. Yeah, there's a link coming later on, a QR code, be prepared. Now, writing a draft isn't an easy track. You always forget something, and there are always people rather keen on pointing these out to you. So the first issue was just client contact server and does everything through the server. Then somebody said, well, you're calling the phone next to you and you're going through the server. That doesn't scale really well. I had to say yes, and I felt embarrassed and shocked and loathing myself and all that. And then I said, oh, wait. And then I said, what you can also do is just, you could add peer-to-peer very easily by just sending a message to the other side and seeing if you get a response. That's very simple. It's much simpler than classifying NAT. So what I do is I send an ICMP neighbor discovery message, and it sends back a neighbor solicitation. If that happens, we've had an ICP6 round trip, meaning we've had an IP6 round trip, meaning we've done something within UDP, and we know for sure that NAT router doesn't know what's traveling over UDP because UDP lacks tagging. That's a feature, guys. That's a feature. That's not a bug. So we can actually assume that if this ICMP comes through in both directions, that you can actually start peering, as long as you keep your holes open, of course. This is only from the part who sent, because the other part doesn't know if the response came back. So it will have to do the same procedure. And there are very clever tricks of using the SYN and ARC flags and TCP, observing those and doing clever things with that to actually make the connection from the beginning, not even do this neighbor solicitation. But that's beyond this talk for now. If you're interested, tomorrow I'm giving a lecture where I go into the depths of this tunnel. Just very briefly, it's in draft 02. It got posted 00 because I changed the file name, so it's a bit confusing. I'll try to fix that later on. But just look at the dates and you'll be fine, because these ones are expired. It's peer-to-peer. It's very well scalable because there are mechanisms to avoid almost ever using the tunnel server. And instead of using Anycast, which was kind of grumpy about at RIPE, people don't like using Anycast because we've seen it going wrong in a number of places. But I needed Anycast to have a prefix that I could recognize as 6-bit 4, so I knew I could directly contact my peer without getting all sorts of harassment warnings on the other side, raising all sorts of flags. So I needed a recognizable prefix, so I've just said I need a /32. And then I've got 32 bits left for, well, the server IP address, so that we can actually differentiate between them, which is useful. Details. The nice thing is this can just be posted as an experimental individual thing, so I hope to get this through, definitely, finally, in a month or two. Nitty-gritty details tomorrow, 2 o'clock T4. I am every enum registrar for the Netherlands. It's really popular to run enum, and I've picked it up because I thought it's too important to let drown. And I know enum isn't popular. We're all waiting for all the other guys to do it, which is not the best possible approach, I suppose. But actually, enum has its problems. It's the big thing about enum. It maps phone numbers in a standard way into the DNS, which is our domain. And that's not where it came from. So I think it's a very powerful technique to be able to map phone numbers, the other domain, the one we are leaving, hopefully soon, to map the other domain to the real domain, where I'm not 12345, but ricketopenfortress.nl. And enum can really help to smoothen this transition. So whatever you do, guys, please support it in some way. Now, enum has its own registry of tagging for the NAT record, and it includes regular expression. That's a bit nasty. So actually, I'm heading towards the religion that we should just add SFE records for SIP, LDAP, if you want to do phone book reverse lookups, cert records for ZRTP and that sort of thing. I think this is the way to use enum. It's much easier. And usually you have a server that needs a user account. Just take the number, which is the reverse from what's in DNS, without a plus, because that confuses stuff. I think this is the way we should go, and I think I'm going to write an ID on that as well, because enum needs some help, I think, and it really needs to. So guys, if you make something that works towards a domain, please have a quick look at enum and wonder how easy or how difficult it is to add it if you don't do it the way of the NAT record, but if you can just do what you always did by just, oh gosh, I've got a number perhaps with a plus prefix. Let's turn it around, stick e164.arpa at the end, use the account as, use the phone number as an account number, and we're fit to go again. Just another lookup mechanism then. To come to conclusions, I have no idea about my time. I missed all the signals maybe, but SIP over IP4 may imply vendor lock-in, and in practice it often does. I mean, you get this wrapped up solution that SIP over IP6 can give you total freedom. You can be a record open fortress, well, I can be a record open fortress.nl, and you can be Johnny at example.com. SIP over IPv6 is possible now, and I think that's the main statement I'm sending here. I've built the tools to make it possible to do it now. Okay, it's all alpha, beta sort of stuff. It needs to be pulled out. I'm looking for a party to help me with that, and then the world will be a better place, I think. There's no need, therefore, to wait for IPv6 to reach the masses, or, as I've told it, right, actually with 6.4, IPv6 is ready. I wrote IP4. That's clumsy. IP6 is ready for the masters. Give me a felt and I will change it here. Okay, not moving until the majority does. That's something you see a lot, and it's very, very destructive for any progress. And you see it everywhere in the internet where party A and party B need to communicate. It's senseless because there's so many party B out there. Let's wait for the majority to move. That means we have no movement. And I've seen several examples of that this week, like browsers still checking upon MD5 signed certificates even though they're insecure. It's horror, guys. We need to move forward. We just need to drop the old crap. And SIP over IP4, as far as I'm concerned, is ready to go. So I have a bit more information, including lots and lots of details about reverse engineering that you might lap up quite nicely. Just follow this site, visit this site. And wow, that's a very big lens to be photographing a QR code. Can you hold it up? Can you hold it up, please? Hold it up so everyone can see it. That's what it's using to shoot a QR code. That's pretty high tech. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Are there any questions? There are, good. Oh, he's smiling, that's also good.
If you have a phone in the middle.
Is this working? Okay. So, the question is about this tunnel, 6 Bravo Echo Delta 4, or however it's called.
6.4?
Okay, so if I understand correctly, it's stateless, and on the IPv4 side, it uses UDP.
It's stateless on the server side, which is very important for maintenance there and for being able to reroute stuff.
The point is, if you insert one UDP packet on one side,
yep,
and you get an IPv6 packet on the other side without any check except for the source IP address.
It does that. It does that. Yeah.
You know where I'm getting.
Yeah, the IP6 address of the sender contains its IP4 address and its UDP port in the lower part of the address. And it ships that either to the server, which checks it, or to the remote, who of course checks it as well. There should be a consistency between the IP4 address and the UDP port.
Okay.
The way I get this address is through a router solicitation to the server, and I get back a router advertisement. If I send something that's wrong, either to a peer or to the router, it will actually respond with a retraction of the old prefix, that is /114. It will retract the old prefix and give you a new prefix containing the new IP4 address and UDP port, and otherwise just booger off because you're doing something wrong.
The point is, there is no secret inserted in the packet which will certify that this is the right packet. It is just a matter of for the attacker to guess the IP addresses involved and spoof its own IP address, which we know it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And if this is, if the attacker is right, he will just insert this packet and this will be happily forwarded.
Okay. If your point is that transport, at the transport level, everything should be secure, there is a standard for that. You can run any VPN, and usually it's, what is it called? It's a horrible standard. It's like a comedy standard. Oh, come on, the standard VPN stuff. IPsec, of course.
Well, of course.
If you think you shouldn't do it at this level, but instead use TLS encryption over your connection, so do things at the application level, use a TLS connection for SIP, and use ZRTP or something of that nature to encrypt your further traffic, and you use DNSSEC for your lookups. This stuff is better resolved at the application level, I think.
Okay, I see. What I was getting at was these attacks from, I think, the name was Dan Kaminsky, for example, where he can map your internal network based on the fact that if he's guessing the right IPs and port combinations on your NAT device, he will be able to send packets to basically your DNS server, and the DNS server will go out and query his DNS server, and he will be able to map the network behind the net. So this is exactly the same attack, basically, with different tools.
Again, there are solutions for this that don't have to be solved when you make an IP tunnel.
Okay, I see.
Dan Kaminsky, it's too late to shoot him, and that wouldn't be good either, because he does very useful work. So I suppose the best option then is to use DNSSEC. And I've heard about DNSSEC a bit, and it's a good idea. Sorry?
Okay.
Secure neighbor discovery. Okay, RAF with patents, so that's a bit scary, but for the, that I should have mentioned, sir. The neighbor discovery protocols for route solicitation at first authentication for IP and the ICMP ping back and forth are indeed using a nonce and a timestamp. Yep. No signatures those, because those are patent written. Some idiot thought, I
have a question about enum. If you get a watermelon there, then you get a free domain name. Where do I get my free phone number without a landline attached or anything else attached and complicated ways of paying and whatnot?
Do you have a domain name?
Yes.
Pick any username at your domain name.
The thing is, people promote enum.
Yeah.
And it's so bad that, for example, the most well-known zip client on Android, you can only dial numbers, even though my phone is perfectly...
That's exactly where enum comes in,
No, the thing is, even though my phone is capable of dialing a domain name, this application is so rooted in the ID that a phone number is only digits that you can dial anything. And there's still people promoting the ID that a phone number is only digits. So I would like people to promote that if you use zip, that you can use any arbitrary domain name, because then we can move forward.
I'm very much promoting that, yes. I'm involved in a project together with Michiel here where we try to put a lot more under domain names than is currently the case. Struggling for money to get it funded, because we want to hire a lot of open source developers to do this. So that we have a direction and get things started. This is definitely part of it. By the way, go to callfilter.net and you can set up an SOV record there, and you can actually do this. Haven't put instructions online to that, but you're welcome to send me an email if you care, and I'll happily serve you at a best effort basis. No problem.
And I have one thing else, that's more a remark, is people don't want another IPv6 tunneling protocol. Certainly not where the ISP is not involved.
Programmers do, users don't, and that's exactly why it shouldn't be configured.
No, the thing is, I mean, the tunneling protocol is fine if the ISP does it. I mean, 6RD proves that it's fine. But the thing is that most people who run other tunneling protocols, they don't involve the ISP. So if you want to promote that on a very large scale, then essentially you get all kinds of network problems that are hard to debug, and nobody wants that. So, I mean, I think that from a technical point of view, your protocol is fine, but if you look at it from an operational point of view, it's just a no-go.
It's a bit complicating. I do want to have a standard UDP port, so Wireshark at least can figure out that it's IP6, and they won't even show the IP4 and UDP headers. And that's quite frankly the solution to that, I think. Most of it. It's a bit more difficult if you start tapping traffic. That's true. Yeah. Another one.
Harvey, you know me?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
We've at Speak Up where I work, we have an IPv6 zip trunk, which works quite nicely, even between IPv4 and IPv6 endpoints. We have one big problem that there are, from what I've seen, very little hardware zip phones that actually support a proper IPv6 stack, let alone a dual stack phone. It's simply not out there yet.
GarageStream is selling them now. I know that Linksys is or was working on them. I don't know how far they are. Cisco/Linksys.
Yeah.
And I've got my firmware on the way.
That's. I'm really looking forward to that. But until that time, I mean, I think I know quite a lot about zip, but I'm not gonna screw open a GarageStream or a soft phone and solder on it to get the IPv6 stack working. Now, so is there anything in between that you can say, if you want to get working with IPv6 and zip, what can I do without soldering something?
And one of the reasons I made SIP proxy 6.4 is to announce IP6 addresses for my front door bell to the world, which is a Cisco Linksys phone, and I really want it to look like IP6, even though it isn't internally. So you can always make that transition as well, make that translation. It's bidirectional. Yeah, and otherwise just take a screwdriver, a soldering gun, a multimeter, or talk to the manufacturers. And perhaps you are at the scale where you can, no, you can't because you don't.
Well, we have quite some contacts with manufacturers, especially SNOM, which has a pretty good SIP stack. But SNOM released an IPv6 firmware, but later they said themselves, well, sorry, it's not really working. And we're trying to promote it, but they're simply not going for it. So, but I mean, we can push some more.
Yeah, or you could introduce me or whatever. I'd be happy to talk to them. Hardware is fun.
Yeah. Okay.
You might have noticed that from my slides.
Okay. Thank you.
Half an answer. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's good enough. Thanks.
Hi, I'm a colleague of Simon, and another problem we encountered was the legacy telephones on IPv4 that didn't really understand what was in the SIP packet anymore. A nice example was a Linksys phone that started parsing the route table, of the route headers.
Yeah.
So it saw an IPv6 address and thought, hey,
there's
a port number.
Yeah. Yeah,
so that's a big a big problem because you can't call anyone using that phone.
Yeah, there is an RFC describing an SDP format where you can use an IP4 address and an IP6 address, and I would not advise using that precisely for this reason. For the rest of the world who doesn't program SIP phones, SIP parsers are usually a bit like this, like exactly what he says. I've also noticed, let's scan for a colon, because that's probably the start of a port number. They're not quite complete passes, validating parser or anything. So that is a problem. So I would never ever send IP6 written packets to an IP4 phone. And that's exactly why I made this translation. It's either IP4 or IP6. And if you want to do both, if a phone has two addresses, I would let it register twice.
And this was just the root header, so it shouldn't even try to touch it.
Okay, I'm not guilty. I agree, but
okay.
These phones are horrible.
But your proxy doesn't send any IPv6 addresses anywhere in the SIP packet.
Sorry, say that again?
Your proxy doesn't send any IPv6 addresses in the whole SIP packet to an IPv6 phone.
Either or.
Okay.
Always either or. That's in my experience the solution, and sounds like you've had the same experience.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other question? If not, then Rick is available after this talk in the Media Cafe for any free consultancy. Make use of it. Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you. I think. And yesterday, when I was preparing for this talk and making my slides, my phone told me I had an incoming phone call from my front door, which of course is a SIP phone. And she was slightly confused. This was not the pattern she had expected. But this is a sort of fun thing you can do with SIP, right? I was away for a few days when my Raspberry Pi was... I got an email that my Raspberry Pi would be delivered out next day, and I wouldn't be there. Now, that's a disaster. So what you do, you log onto your phone, you reroute it to a few neighbors who call over SIP, and they pick up your front door, walk outside, meet the package delivery guy, pick up the package, and walk away again. This is the sort of fun that SIP is meant for. It's very useful. Now, you could say, why talk about SIP at all? It's all been designed. There's lots of extensions, beautiful, and it's just about communicating, hey, I'm going to send some media, you pick it up. You have to show that you're available for telephony at your email address, and they'll understand it. Now, just very quickly, what's the problem with NOT? You have two phones talking to some sort of a PBX. Sorry about the crummy graphics, by the way. I had a font meltdown and I had to use this crummy OpenOffice that, well, I don't like it. LaTeX is much nicer, but this will have to do. One phone connects to the PBX. It says, I've got an invitation for you. Yeah, I'll pick it up. By then, they've exchanged a media stream and they will directly exchange this traffic, except in practice, because in practice there's this firewall and NAT in between that makes it necessary to go through a central node in general. I'll get to the details later. Now, the firewall aspect isn't a problem at all. I mean, getting through firewalls is just a lot of fun, right? That's not a big problem. But NAT is really nasty because you send out, this is my address, it's rewritten. Hello, everyone. Yeah, over the past few years, I've been keeping an eye on SIP technology, and I've been wondering why it didn't progress. And quite frankly, I've been looking at it initially from a security angle because I wanted to have encryption, and nothing really worked until ZRTP came along, which made me really happy, made me dive into SIP again, and I immediately bounced into the big problem of SIP, and that's NAT. And the solution, of course, is trivial. It's running it over IPv6 and being harsh about it. Now, SIP can be really tremendously powerful and beautiful. This is a picture of a friend of mine, Brechtje Lulofs. She's an artist, and she draws these beautiful, stylish, nostalgic pictures. She's a really good illustrator. Or it's not rewritten. You have to figure out how you look on the outside, and it might vary. Briefly said, one party, blue, wants to call purple, and blue says, okay, I'm going to use something like Aston to figure out how I look on the outside. What's my IP? What's my port? I'm going to ignore the IP for now. What's the port? It gets a response saying, you look to me like you're active on port A. So then it sends, a SIP invite, including a session description saying, please send media to port A. I've got a port reserved for that through Aston. The other party does the same. The purple party says, oh, I'm on port B apparently, so you can send media to port B. And then the parties start sending media to each other from A to B and from B to A. That's symmetric RTP. That's the only way to keep NAT and firewalls open, because if traffic travels in one direction only, you are not going to keep it open. Average firewall will close then. Trivial. Unfortunately, it's not. SIP is very much hampered by NAT issues, and even more than FTP, where at least one side is a server, so you can say, I'll go passive and I'll just do it the other way around, and then I will pierce through my own NAT. With SIP, you have peer-to-peer communication. You will preferably send your media stream peer-to-peer, and that's not working. Other things are also complicating, like there's, at least in the Netherlands, but I believe in many other countries as well, the party acting as your ISP doubles as a telco, and that doesn't make them really open to providing SIP as open as we all want it to be, and hopefully someday my parents can use, for example. Users don't understand how to free themselves. You can explain that they could call for free, but they'll grasp the free beer aspect, not the free speech aspect. And that, I think, is something, well, you have to show, and they'll